We could see through it, and I can assure you that there was no one there. It was just us, but the banging was relentless, echoing through the room. We were both sobbing by now, absolutely terrified. We called our mom, begging her to come home immediately. But she didn't believe us. She thought that we were just imagining things or trying to prank her. But later, when things finally calmed down, my brother checked my back, and sure enough, I had 5 scratch marks running down my skin. They weren't deep, but they were definitely there, and that was really the only time that I was ever physically attacked by, well, that spirit. It makes me wonder, too, if another one entered my home that day, because it's so odd and out of character that it just seems, well, different. I had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog or house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few arches of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite it a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves. And there's lots of abandoned, dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes as well. It's a pretty typical countryside neighborhood, I guess. But I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115 lb jet black American bulldog. English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle. And ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lahi. Lahi is a 57 lb poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts. With bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other certainly is not. Now, because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lahi at the same time on my own, and so I usually walk Lottie alone, and then go back to get Hennessy and walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night, because I feel safer with him as it gets. Later, this is important too, because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lahi when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 ft or so back, it was a tall man in hoodie standing next to an older rundown home. I instantly thought that the hoodie was a bit weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than like 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting. Like it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off though, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading scary stories. But as I kept walking, the sun kept setting, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance, but still, if I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which thankfully it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around. But now, being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lai had noticed him too, and started to bark and growl a bit. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. But it was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking, because they always do. When someone is at the door, there's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side because it's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there through the barking. I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her for some reason?" The way that he said it was just so creepy, it was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he had rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog, can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell that something is wrong in Circumly. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he is mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Leahy into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy, mind you. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" And he paused and then slammed into my door. I would say, too, that the door moved at that moment. Unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back, and I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps toward the man. And well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could, and out of sight. Eventually, I managed to pull Hennessy back in, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never did get a good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there wasn't anything that I could really do. But they did take my statement and told me that they'd contact me if anything ever came of it, honestly. Though I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Leahy that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that really was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone that I could find from a pet store, nearly an hour away, because he definitely had earned it. I also got something, too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize that he was hearing 2 barks, or assume that if I had 2 dogs, that they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say that he just wasn't afraid. I'm very thankful, though, that the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have called the cops and kept my door closed, to be honest. But I hope that, maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us, because if he does this time, I'll let my big sweet boy rip him to pieces. Ever since my grandfather who lived with us became sick, and after his recent death, my mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable thing happening inside of our house. I always tried to write it off, but this night something happened that truly freaked me the heck out. For some context, we live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 80s to my mom's recollection when she first bought the house 13 years ago. There was no reported deaths in the house, or any history on the land that it sits on to bring everything back to the beginning of these events occurring in December of 2023. My grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized in his absence, is when we, and even my grandfather who was in the hospital, realized that something had changed inside of our home only days after his hospitalization. Both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps or movements downstairs in the basement. My grandfather's room is in the basement. Many times we chalked it up to just old house noises, wood creaking, the house settling, etc., until more physical things started happening, like the downstairs bathroom sink running, washing and dryer machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open which were previously closed, items that were once on shelves being found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of papers spilled on the ground, lights flickering and turning completely off when in a room once the stereo or radio system we downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. Those were all the things that happened inside the house. But what's even freakier, and what made the rest of my family worried, are two specific instances in my grandfather's hospital room, once in front of my mother and aunt, and a second time with just my aunt in the room. The first time happened later in the day, after dinner, when my mom and my aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mom was confused and told my aunt, and she too became confused because obviously no one else was in the room. They thought that it was just him seeing things, because the nurse said that he wasn't all up there after his fall. The second time, though, was much more intense, and left my aunt hysterically calling my mom over the phone late at night. She told my mom that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he just sort of jolted up with a horrified look on his face, and quietly told my aunt that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out and stood from her chair and turned and saw nothing. She calmed back down and sat back in her chair and tried to ease my grandfather. She said that he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." And my aunt said that she felt something touch her shoulder along with a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mom soon after in a panic, and my mom advised her to go home for the night, and after that there were no more incidences in the hospital after that. There seemed to be less activity at our house until, well, he passed a few weeks ago. Since then, my mother and I continued to hear the odd sound objects being misplaced, lights going on and off in the basement until about an hour ago, and my mom came into my room at about 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I just wanted ice cream. I said sure of that, and I went to the door to put my shoes on. My mom said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to, so I chose to stay home in the end. As she left, she told me to lock the door behind her. As I went to the bathroom as she left, I got out of the bathroom and promptly locked the door. I also want to note that our screen door wasn't locked, but was definitely latched at the time. After I closed the door, I went back to my room and sat, and I discontinued a game that I was playing with my headphones on. After about 10 to 15 minutes of my mom being gone, I very clearly heard my mom's voice yelling my name to come and grab the ice cream. I get up and speed walk to the door, yelling, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you get home." And as I turn the corner to the front door, the door is slightly ajar, screen door wide open, and my mom and her car are nowhere to be seen. I was quite spooked by that because the sound of my mom's voice was so loud that I heard it over the floor. Fan in my headphones, I relocated the door and locked myself in my room until my mom got home with the ice cream. I told her what happened, and she was also spooked, and we together searched the house in case somebody had actually got in. But there was nothing. I also forgot to mention that the majority of the time our two dogs in the house never barked at anything, except for a few times in the basement. Maybe 2 or 3 times. I really don't know how to end this because I'm just not a good storyteller, but the only upside is that we are moving soon, and hopefully this stuff won't keep happening in the new place that we're moving into. I worked security in 2019 to 2021. One place that I was working was a call center, and there was 24/7 guards on scene, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 1 overnight on the overnight shift. There was no one else in the building. All doors were locked, and all ID scanners were locked as well. I need you to understand that there was no one else in the building. There was no way anyone else could have been in the building with me. This happened in 2020 when everyone was working from home, and the security team were the only people that were even in the building. So at every odd hour I would do a patrol around the building, check into all the rooms that I had to swipe at, and return back to the desk. Other than that, I'd sit there and watch the cameras and play my Switch. Now one night, while I was there for the overnight shift and the other 2 guards had left, I had to go on patrol. The lights in the building were all out, And it didn't really matter that much because I could see enough with the lights from the parking lot. And I'd never been afraid to walk around alone there because, really, I enjoyed the job anyway. I walked through the downstairs, checked all the exit to make sure that they were locked, then all the staircases to make sure that they were empty. When I moved to the second floor, I heard one of the phones ringing. Out in the desks, not unheard of. And because of the sensitivity of it all, we aren't allowed to touch the phones except for the front desk ones. Obviously, I usually played music to walk around, but this time I'd left my phone to charge at the desk. There was no device on me that could have made a sound. The phone had since stopped ringing, and I was still alone as I moved to the final part of the building for my patrol. That was when I hear a small thud by the stairway at the back that didn't bother me too much. But when I heard a female voice call out, "Help me," that was when I froze. I stayed silent and I didn't move.